What does it take to silence a room full of skeptics with a single piece of paper? In the sweltering summer of 1963, in a small Alabama courthouse, Ella Mae Johnson stood alone at the defendant's table, her heart pounding like a drum against the weight of 100 judgmental eyes. The air was thick with humidity and prejudice, the kind that clung to the walls of the old building as much as it did to the minds of those inside. Ella Mae, a black woman in her late 30s, was no stranger to hardship, but today she faced a trial that could strip her of everything: her home, her dignity, and her hope. The judge, a wiry man with a face carved from years of self-assured authority, leaned forward in his chair, his gavel resting like a scepter. Judge Harlan Cobb was known for his sharp tongue and sharper biases, and today his attention was fixed on Ella Mae. She stood accused of forging a property deed, a charge that could see her small plot of land, her only inheritance from her late father, seized by the county. The plaintiff, a local businessman named Walter Grayson, claimed the land was rightfully his, part of a deal her father had supposedly made decades ago. The evidence? A flimsy, handwritten contract that Grayson's lawyer waved like a flag of victory. Ella Mae's voice, rich with the cadence of her Alabama roots, trembled as she tried to explain herself. "My daddy never signed no paper like that, sir. That land's been ours since my granddaddy's time. I got proof, I swear it." Her words, laced with the deep, melodic drawl of her community, seemed to bounce off the courtroom walls, met with smirks and stifled laughter from the gallery. Judge Cobb's lips curled into a sneer. "Proof, you say?" he drawled, mocking her accent with exaggerated slowness. "Well, Miss Johnson, why don't you speak proper English and tell us where this so-called proof is?" The courtroom erupted in chuckles, the sound cutting into Ella Mae like a blade. Her cheeks burned, but she held her head high, her hands clasped tightly around a worn leather satchel. Inside, it was her only weapon, her only chance. Ella Mae had grown up in a world that told her she was less intelligent, less capable, less human. Born in a sharecropper's shack, she'd learned to read by candlelight, taught by her mother, who believed words were the key to freedom. Her father, a quiet man with calloused hands, had spent his life working the land that now hung in the balance. When he died, he'd left Ella Mae more than just soil. He'd left her a legacy of resilience. She'd spent years saving every penny, educating herself, and piecing together the truth about her family's land. But in this courtroom, none of that seemed to matter. To them, she was just a black woman with a funny way of talking, standing in the way of a white man's ambition. Grayson's lawyer, a slick man in a pressed suit, paced before the bench, painting Ella Mae as a liar, a schemer who'd fabricated her claim to cheat an honest businessman. He held up the contract, yellowed and creased, and read aloud its terms with theatrical flourish. This document, signed by one Ezekiel Johnson in 1940, clearly transfers ownership to Mr. Grayson's father. What does the defendant have to counter this? Nothing, but her word, and a questionable one at that. The gallery murmured in agreement, their biases fed by his words. Ella Mae's own lawyer, a young man fresh out of law school and visibly nervous, fumbled through his notes. He'd taken her case pro bono, moved by her quiet determination, but he was outmatched. "Your Honor," he began, "my client insists she has documentation that will clarify this matter. If we could—" "Clarify," Judge Cobb interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. "Boy, I've heard enough of her clarifications. She talks like she's got molasses in her mouth. Let's move this along." The laughter swelled again, and Ella Mae felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. She wanted to scream, to demand respect, but she knew better. In this room, her anger would only fuel their contempt. Instead, she took a deep breath and reached into her satchel. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "I ain't here to waste nobody's time. I got something you need to see." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly amused, but nodded for her to continue. She pulled out a single document, its edges frayed, but its ink pristine. She handed it to her lawyer, who passed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The room fell silent. the air charged with curiosity. Judge Cobb unfolded the paper, his smirk fading as his eyes scanned the text. It was a deed, notarized and stamped, dated 1935, 5 years before Grayson's supposed contract. The document detailed the transfer of the land from Ella May's grandfather to her father, Ezekiel Johnson, with clear, legal precision. But what made the judge's face pale was the signature at the bottom. His own father, then a county clerk, had notarized it. The seal was unmistakable, the handwriting a ghostly echo of a man long gone. The courtroom held its breath. Grayson's lawyer, sensing trouble, leapt to his feet. "This could be a forgery, Your Honor. We need time to verify." "Sit down," Cobb snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. He read the document again, his fingers tracing the seal as if it might vanish. Ella May watched him, her heart racing. She found the deed buried in her father's old trunk, tucked beneath letters and photographs. It had taken her months to understand its significance, to track down the records that corroborated it. She'd walked miles to the county archives, endured suspicious glares, and spent sleepless nights piecing together her case. This was her truth, and now it was in the judge's hands. "Where did you get this?" Cobb demanded, his tone no longer mocking, but laced with something like fear. "My daddy kept it safe," Ella May said simply. "He always said the land was ours, and he wasn't no liar." Her words, still wrapped in her rich accent, carried a quiet power now. The gallery was silent, the laughter gone. Even Grayson, sitting smugly moments before, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge stared at the deed, then at Ella May. For the first time, he saw her not as a caricature, but as a woman who'd fought against a world designed to crush her. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the stillness. "This document," he said, his voice low, "appears to be authentic. It predates the plaintiff's claim and bears the seal of this county. The court finds in favor of the defendant, Ella May Johnson. The land is hers." A gasp rippled through the room. Grayson's face twisted in disbelief, his lawyers stammering objections. But Cobb's gavel came down with a finality that silenced them all. Ella May stood frozen, her eyes welling with tears she refused to let fall. She'd won, not just the land, but a moment of justice in a place where it was rarely given to people like her. As the courtroom emptied, Ella May lingered, clutching her satchel. The young lawyer, beaming with pride, shook her hand. "You did it, Miss Johnson," he said. She nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere in her father, her mother, her ancestors who'd worked that land through blood and sweat. This victory was theirs too. Outside, the Alabama sun beat down, but Ella May felt lighter than she ever had. She'd faced a room full of doubters, a judge who'd mocked her very voice, and she'd won with the truth. The land was hers, but more than that, she'd reclaimed her dignity. In a world that tried to silence her, she'd spoken loud enough to be heard. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.